This is the story of the very famous serial killer in the United States, the Golden State Killer, whose real name is Joseph DeAngelo. He committed 13 murders and over 50 essays. It took 42 years to apprehend him. It all started in Sacramento, California, October 5th, 1976. A woman has just been assaulted in her home in Citrus Heights. She was tied up, gagged, and essayed. Detectives Richard Shelby and Carol Deli were on the scene to collect the victim's testimony. She is a 30-year-old nurse named Jane Carson. At around 6:30 a.m., her husband had just left for work, and her 3-year-old son had joined her in bed, and they had fallen asleep. They were suddenly awakened by the noise of the garage door and footsteps in the hallway. Then the door to her room opened, and a man entered wearing a hood and holding a knife. He tied her with shoelaces at the wrists and ankles and a blindfold over her eyes. He did the same to the 3-year-old and took him to another room. Then he returned to Jane's bedroom, untied her, and essayed her. Afterward, she heard him in the kitchen, opening cabinets and the refrigerator. She heard sounds of pots or pans. He was preparing food for himself. Then he left, and she managed to alert a neighbor. While his colleague finished questioning the victim, Inspector Shelby decided to go around the neighborhood, interviewing people. That's when he learned that a burglar had been active in the area in the preceding weeks, a peculiar character who stole items of no value and left them in the next house. Jane Carson's house had also been burglarized a few weeks before. Back at the sheriff's office, Inspector Shelby had a hunch. The assailant was not a first-time offender. He searched for cases involving a woman bound, gagged, and a man with a hood. 4 files came up, 4 essays in recent months in Sacramento. In one case, a 22-year-old woman was violated by a hooded man on June 18th in the Rancho Cordova neighborhood. He used shoelaces to tie her up and then essay her. Another case involved a 15-year-old girl who, at 2 in the morning, found a man lying on her in bed, tying her hands and telling her to play along. This occurred in the same neighborhood as the previous incident. Then there was an incident last summer where a hooded man broke into a 40-year-old mother's home with her 2 daughters. He entered half naked with a hood over his head, but the woman fought back, and he fled. Finally, a 29-year-old woman in the same neighborhood was tied up with shoelaces in September. The man wore a gray hood and held a knife. Shoelaces, a hood, and the same words in all 4 cases, all in the east suburbs of Sacramento. None of these women, of course, saw the face of the killer because of the hood, but all described him as about 6 feet tall. Richard Shelby then thinks for the first time that they have a serial sex offender on their hands. So he talked to the sheriff, but he dismissed his remarks. The sheriff didn't want it to leak out. He didn't want to scare the public. 4 days after Jane's assault, a 19-year-old woman is attacked by a hooded man in Rancho Cordova, still in the east of the city. And 10 days later, 2 other women on the same night in the same neighborhoods. Frankly, if the police had warned people, the last 3 assaults could have been avoided. The sheriff has no choice. He has to make this case public. So, public meetings were held in the affected neighborhoods to alert people. At the first public meeting, 500 people attended. Some come with notebooks to take notes about the case. But despite all these recommendations, another essay occurs a few days later in the same east suburb, involving a 16-year-old girl. So the sheriff decides to step up his efforts and creates a special unit of 40 people, dedicated entirely to tracking down this guy, investigators, dogs, a forensic team, and street teams mingling among the residents. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, move into a house in the Rancho Cordova neighborhood. They simulate a normal life during the day, and at night they wait, anticipating his arrival. Thanks to the victim's testimonies, here's what we know about this man. He's around 20 years old, 6 feet tall, with an average build. According to the girls, he has very muscular and hairy calves, and also according to the victims, he has very small genitalia. On his part, Inspector Shelby has noted other details. The assailant has a clear preference for camouflage clothing, khaki attire. He knows how to handle knives and tie intricate knots. Shelby wonders if he could be a military man or a former military, perhaps a Vietnam veteran. There are 5 military bases in the Sacramento area. On December 18, 1976, 15-year-old Chris McFarland becomes the 10th victim of the hooded man. He breaks into her home while her parents are out, and she is playing the piano. All of a sudden, she feels a blade on her neck. The hooded man ties her with shoelaces, blindfolds her, and SA her. The pattern continues: a new victim on January 24th, another on February 7th, and yet another on March 8th. In the early spring of 1977, the Sacramento Sheriff's Office attributes 14 SAs to him. Sacramento barricades itself. Windows that were left open are now closed. People change their locks to sturdier models. Some install bars on their windows, while others equip themselves with state-of-the-art alarms. Under their beds, Sacramento residents hide baseball bats, hammers, and even revolvers. In some homes, the father spends the night on the couch and is armed. Gun sales skyrocket, 5,000 more than the previous year. Every day, Inspector Richard Shelby roams the streets where the assault occurred, following every possible lead. But they lead nowhere. In 14 cases, no fingerprints were found. Not for lack of trying, he left none. The guy wears gloves and never takes them off. However, they did find a trace of blood on one of the victim's hairs. Still, in 1977, the technique to read DNA sequences has not yet been invented. They only extracted the blood type and compare it to the police officers in the region who match the killer's morphology. But the lab results come back all negative. 2 detectives from Visalia County, a 4-hour drive from Sacramento, are working on a murder case from 1974. A man was shot twice in his backyard while trying to rescue his daughter, who was about to be SA. The killer wore a mask. It is believed that the same person committed a series of burglaries in the neighborhood before this murder. In this case, there were footprints found near the girl's window, but they also have a composite sketch. An officer almost caught him and kinda saw his face. Since the assaults in Sacramento started shortly after, detectives suspected it might be the same individual. Moreover, before turning to murder, when the man was just a burglar, he did peculiar things in the houses he visited. He stole almost nothing but vandalized rooms, damaged clothes, disturbed belongings, moved things around, and sometimes took an interest in women's underwear, laying them out in the hallway. According to profilers who worked on the case at the time, his motivation was sexual crimes. The composite sketch drawn by the Visalia police depicts a man with sharp eyes, thick cheeks, and straw-colored hair brushed to the side. The Visalia police say he later committed 2 more burglaries and then vanished. This was in December 1975. 6 months later, the first SA in the long series in Sacramento occurred. In Sacramento, the East Area sex offender seems to be gaining confidence. To one of his victims, he said, "You can tell those damn cops I could have killed 2 people tonight. If I don't see all of this in the press tomorrow, I will kill 2 people." A week later, a teenager is SA in Rancho Cordova. It's clear that he is escalating. He won't settle for just sexual crimes. He's going to kill someone. On the night of April 2nd, 1977, at 2 in the morning, a hooded man with a gun enters a house in the east of Sacramento. He wakes the sleeping couple, instructs the husband to tie himself up with shoelaces, and then does something he hadn't done before. He places a stack of plates on the husband's back and says, "If I hear a single plate move or the bed creak, I'll kill everyone in the house." He then essay the woman 3 times. It's the first time he targets couples. What Inspector Shelby doesn't know is that the hooded man knows where he lives. One night in May 1977, Shelby's 4-year-old son, Tom, hears a loud noise above his head, someone walking on the roof. He looks out the window and sees an upside-down face looking at him. Suddenly, the man turns on his flashlight. The boy is terrified, runs to his parents' room, and hides in their bed. Inspector Shelby hears nothing. His son tells him the story the next morning. The East Area rapist paid him a visit. The madness of this man knows no bounds. After his visit, Inspector Shelby is so affected and exhausted by everything that the investigation is taken away from him. Carol Daly takes over. After a 2-month break during the summer of 1977, the assaults resume, 6 more between September and December. For some time, all the officers on the team have been saying, "One day he's going to kill," and it eventually happens. One evening in February 1978, Brian and Kathy return from walking their dog. A man shoots them in their yard. He didn't wear a mask, and neighbors saw him. He had light brown hair brushed to the right side, a square jaw, and raised eyebrows. A composite sketch is published in the press. This is the last time the hooded man, now turned killer, surfaces in Sacramento. The next assaults, 15 in total, same method, same shoelaces, same knot, occur far from Sacramento. They occurred in Southern California. Then 2 murders, Kiss and Patty Arrington in August 1980. Patty was S.A. twice. Then Manuela Witten was S.A. and beaten to death in February 1981. The investigation into these murders lasts for 15 years with no results. But from the beginning, the police have sperm samples in their evidence. In 1995, they managed to extract DNA. Now they know that it's the same person who killed the Arringtons and Manuela Witten. However, the guy is not in the DNA database. On the other hand, we can attribute a 4th murder in the region to him, Janelle Cruz, killed in May 1986. And in the following years, the list grows thanks to DNA analysis. The murder of a couple in 1979, 2 double murders in 1980, and another in 1981. We're now at 10 deaths, 10 murders, not yet linked to the hooded man, as they occurred far from Sacramento. It's only in 2000 that the connection is made thanks to DNA. What we can't understand is that the guy hasn't done anything since 1986. Is he dead? Is he in prison? Well, who knows? All these questions remain unanswered for years. It's an ordinary citizen, Michelle McNamara, who, in 2010, revived this investigation. She is drawn into this case, accumulating hundreds and hundreds of documents, filling dozens of notebooks. It's her who gives a definitive nickname to the serial killer, the Golden State Killer. Michael spends hours alone at home tracking the killer. It becomes the priority in her life, perhaps too much. As the months go by, she takes more and more medications to keep up: Adderall, Xanax, and fentanyl. One day, she overdoses and dies, and then her loved ones dig up and continue her work. 3,500 files on her computer, 37 boxes of documents. Before her death, Michael McNamara had an idea. There are more and more genealogy websites in the United States. People get their DNA analyzed to know their origins, like myheritage.com. She thought that maybe a relative of the killer had their DNA analyzed, and perhaps this way they could trace it back to him, A forensic pathologist named Paul Holtz, also a genealogist, takes on the challenge. One day, a name appears in the files of the MyHeritage.com website: Joseph James DeAngelo. He currently lives in Sacramento and was a police officer in the 70s, fired for a theft incident. Physically, even though he has aged, he resembles the composite sketch from the time of the crimes. Police stake out in front of DeAngelo's home in the Citrus Heights neighborhood in the east of Sacramento. One day, they follow him to a hardware store. He enters the store and they rush to his car to collect his DNA from the handles. After analysis, it's indeed him. He is the Golden State Killer. After 42 years, 13 murders, and 50 essays, the Golden State Killer, alias Joseph DeAngelo, is arrested on April 24, 2018, as he leaves his home. He shouts, "What the hell is happening?" with the same high-pitched voice that so many victims have described. Detective Ken Clark is in charge of his interrogation. He gets nothing from him. He doesn't say a word. He was a former police officer. He knows how it goes. And it will be like that until his trial. The essays are prescribed, but the murders are not. The Sacramento prosecutor can finally announce publicly what so many others dreamed of doing before her. The Golden State Killer has been arrested. Four out of the 5 California prosecutors seek the death penalty against DeAngelo, but the judge doesn't want it. So he proposes a deal. If you plead guilty to the 13 murders, the 13 attempted kidnappings, and you acknowledge the 50 essays, in exchange you will be sentenced to life in prison. He accepts the deal. Joseph DeAngelo is then sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is sent to the California State Prison in Corcoran, and that's where he remains. And that's where he will stay for the rest of his life. If you enjoyed our deep dives into the world of true crime, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.